they already brought the talking heads out on the financial shows in the morning. Oh, the Elon won't be able to cut anything out of the budget. We automatically spend this because Wall Street doesn't want to give up their handouts, right?
Yeah.
Nor does the defense industry, nor does any of these insane amount of agencies.
Welcome to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Well, David, we record this on a Wednesday morning for weekend broadcast, and I heard you walking down the hallways singing. Is that your commentary on the election result?
Yeah, it went in my favor for sure. But not only did it go in our favor, it was a pretty big sweep to the way. That was a pretty good red wave, something we thought we were going to have.
Supposed to happen last cycle.
Yeah, last time. Yeah. Last cycle did not occur. And it was just a rebuke of policies getting a little out of hand, I think you would say. There's a county down in Texas, southern Texas, very close to the border, that has not gone Republican since 1896.
Is that right?
It went Republican over 68% of the vote. So a big, big change. So what you're seeing is the economy and the inflation and the border, those are the three things based on the exit polls that I was watching were affecting the vote.
Speaking of those exit polls, I saw one during the day, and yet I don't know how much stock you can put in these, but some commentators that I consider somewhat neutral, were saying the exit polls are showing something like 75% of people walking away saying they're not happy with the direction the country is going. That usually does not bode well for an incumbent.
Absolutely, and so this was and when you win and get both sides of Congress, as it appears to be the case as of this recording, you can take that as a mandate. Hey, we want significant change. So now the question becomes one of the reasons I told people I was excited to vote for Trump is knowing he was locked into only one more term, right? Because now there's no worried about reelection, so he needs to go ahead and set his agenda and decide what he wants to try and make happen. But they already brought the talking heads out on the financial shows in the morning. Oh, the Elon won't be able to cut anything out of the budget. We automatically spend this because Wall Street doesn't want to give up their handouts, right? Yeah. Nor does the defense industry, nor does any of these insane amount of agencies. And again, I'm all for Javier Milei here. I mean, I will pay for his airfare to fly up here myself.
Gone. Yeah, that department gone. We had that last week.
We need to get some serious work. I mean, like Social Security, people complain all the time. Oh, you're going to take some of these benefits. No, you start working later, so you should receive your benefits later. You're living longer, you'll get more monthly checks. So it's very simple. If you're under 50, Social Security age should be 70. It's that simple. Done. If you're under 40, it should be 72 because you're going to live to 95 to 110 based on all the actuarial data that we have. You're going to get way more benefits, but these are the easy fixes that you could solve some of our crisis. But listen, we're still spending money. And so my cautionary tale is, and I actually posted something on LinkedIn before the election yesterday morning, and it just said, listen, even if it's a red wing sweep, you're going to see equities, everything jump. We saw that. The futures were up about 2% across the board. But I said, be careful. You're going to see the 10-year Treasury rip to close to 4.45, and it went above that already. And that is telling you that the market, the bond market, is paying attention, and inflation is coming back. And so that is going to be a problem with the Federal Reserve. The Fed's going to cut rates this week, a quarter basis point. That's kind of locked in. And yet you're going to see the yields on the longer end of the curve go up. Mortgage costs are going to go up. So we have a lot of headwinds we're still going to be facing.
Well, and once the dust fully settles and the smoke clears, we'll ask you for a more in-depth analysis of what you see coming now, given the election result. But can I ask you one more thing before we leave this? You've said numerous times, whoever wins the presidential election, you still think we're going to see an economic recession in 2025. Does that still hold?
Absolutely. And I think that you're going to see the data start to kind of show you that. In other words, we had an event where we brought in a senior economist from First Trust, which is one of the companies that we get a lot of investment, research from.
Strider Elias.
Yes. Yeah. And so he actually predicted yesterday, by the way, on Twitter, he predicted the red sweep. They a couple of their guys predicted a thin margin. They thought it would be 53-47 on the Senate, Trump winning, and then 219-216. Again, we don't know the exact numbers, but they look like they could be pretty accurate right now. But what we're going to see is we're going to see the data now actually start to show what's really happening. So we had the economy this week, the jobs number that came out most recently show that we only added 12,000 jobs last month, Chip, right? The jobs number we got to start this month.
Well, and I think if you remove the government jobs and just count private sector, it's negative, right?
It was negative 28,000 when you took out the government hires. Now, on top of that, I think we've got a graph for this, but on top of that, Liz Ann Saunders, who's the chief investment officer of Schwab, all right, and she's right down the middle. She does nothing but great data. She produced a chart showing if you take all the seasonal adjustments that the BLS puts into those numbers, we lost 580,000 jobs. Lost 500,000 real full-time jobs. And that's one of the biggest drawdowns we've seen. And again, all these revisions, we've had nothing but negative revisions. So there's no reason to hide the data anymore, right? And we actually had Strider Loss, who I mentioned, came and spoke at we did our September speaker series. And one of the questions when he and I took Q&A on stage was someone was like, can we trust the government? Oh, you got to be able to trust the data. Sure, there's some seasonal adjustments, right? Yeah. He kind of, and that's what his job is. He's got to tell you as an economist, they have to be able to rely on this data.
So the point is these guys at First Trust, they're not tinfoil conspiracy extremists, but
his boss literally yesterday tweeted out,
that's Brian Wesbury, who we cite often on this show.
Absolutely. I consider him a friend. He's one of my favorite economists. He's been right for almost about 18 years now on just about everything. The only thing he's different on sometimes is just like me. He may be a little early in his calls, but he put out a message on Twitter, and I think we've got I copied and pasted it and threw it into
with the whole team.
Yeah, I sent it with the whole team.
We have it for our YouTube viewers. I'm going to ask you to summarize it for our radio listeners. What did Brian Wesbury have to say?
Well, basically, he said, listen, I've been an economist for longer than a lot of you have been alive, and we have to be able to rely on this data. He no longer thinks he can rely on the data. He thinks the data has, in fact, been skewed. And so what I'm saying, now that we have an administration coming in with a different agenda, if you will, there's going to be no more reason for government agencies to hide the data. So Trump is going to, whether he likes it or not, get a lot of negative data when it comes to how the consumer is really doing, to the jobs market, et cetera, which is, in fact, a precursor to a recession. And there is tons of data backing up what I've been saying for a long time. It's just been kind of covered up. So again, for Brian Wesbury to tweet this, and one of our advisors, Brad Stark, who's been with us a long time, he's been following Brian Wesbury's whole career as well. And we always joke, Brian's always sort of that perma bull. He's telling you, and in fact, this morning he actually put a tweet out, and I don't have that with me this morning, but hey, he goes, look, there's euphoria out there for a lot of business owners, small business owners in particular. They're very excited. I am excited based on the election results because it means we're going to have an opportunity to grow. By the way, we're hiring. So
small business did well under the Trump administration, deregulation, lower taxes.
Yeah. So I'm excited from that standpoint. And again, we'll probably break this down here in a coming up show where we spend a whole section on this. But what I'm telling you is listen, the euphoria in the markets, the stocks are over 20% overvalued still, and they're going out further. So I don't know when it's coming. It may be next week. It may be in the spring, but we are going to have a severe correction in these equity markets. Just be prepared for that.
All right, so we looked at the job situation. Now, I'm going to throw a blizzard of headlines at you. You've been sharing these with the team as well, from Fox Business, from CNBC, from a number of sources. Yum Brands earnings miss estimates as KFC, Pizza Hut report same-store sales declines. Burger King parent restaurant brands fall short of third-quarter expectations. TGI Fridays closes 50 restaurants, may reportedly file bankruptcy, and then about a week later, TGI Fridays files for bankruptcy. Pandemic blamed for financial woes. 7-Eleven closing 444 stores nationwide, with some already closed in Las Vegas, where we've
Chip,
just
do you have any good news?
Well, boom, the hits just keep on coming. But I think, David, this is indicative of what you've been saying. I know the markets have been roaring and looking great, but at the grassroots economic level where people live and try to hold down jobs and try to run businesses, the gears are grinding.
No, and it's just people cannot afford the luxury of, I mean, like 7-Eleven. I mean, that was a staple growing up. I used to get in trouble. I'd go there and play pinball, put one quarter in, ring up 10 credits, and then try to sell them. And my brothers and I have some stories of hanging out at 7-Eleven.
Oh, you were an entrepreneur right from the start.
But I mean, I used to hang out at 7-Eleven. You get a big gulp or the Slurpee. You used to love a Coke Slurpee, Coca-Cola Slurpee as a kid. But they're a staple, right? And if you're not familiar, because 7-Elevens are not prominent here. I don't know if they ever were. Southland Corporation 7-Elevens.
Yeah, they were. They had their day here.
Okay,
yeah.
But they were prominent where I grew up, and what happened have you. And here we have the Come and Go and the Casey's, et cetera. But closing a whole brand of bellwether convenience stores is a pretty big deal. And then you flip over to the fast food, right? That's where people typically go to get a cheaper meal, if you will, right? Because it's not the healthiest stuff, but the convenience and the economically was viable. Both Pizza Hut and KFC reported over 4% decline across the board in sales. So it didn't matter if it was chicken or pizza. It didn't matter what the category. And the same thing we saw, with the other restaurants there. So we're seeing that the consumer is absolutely tapped out, can't afford it, and so these restaurants are unfortunately having to close. TGI Fridays, which I actually worked at for a very short period of time once, a long time ago. That was a bellwether of like happy hour for the business community. They used to have, I don't know if you ever went to one of them in the early days, they used to have a gorilla come out every Friday and dance around in the bar, et cetera. Yeah, the old days of, but that's gone. And this is telling you where we're going, right? There's going to be more chaos coming. And so while I'm excited about Trump's election here and the red wave, if you will, simply because they're going to be able to take swift action, there's going to be a lot of pain to waddle through. You can't just, patch it up and say, oh, we're going to be fine. So there will be some pain here economically. And so I think people need to be prepared for what's coming.
Well, we'll keep an eye on all of it, friends. Meanwhile, up next, David Brooks is great, but it takes a team to do what we do at Retire Smart. We welcome back to our show a vital member of that team. Financial advisor Mike Schudel joins us next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. One of our most popular classes is Estate and Tax Planning in Retirement. Another round of those classes is fast approaching, and one of the presenters is with us today. David, please welcome financial advisor Mike Schudel to the show.
Thank you, Chip. Yes, once again in the studio, we have our resident authority on everything estate planning. And with the election results we just got this week, there are going to be some changes coming, which is why these classes are so imperative. Number one, just when you build a good estate plan, you got to build it flexible to change when legislative changes come down the pipe. And we are going to have some changes most likely to what we now know as current law. So welcoming in Mike Schudel, our kind of resident authority on these things. You're going to be teaching one of our upcoming classes here. When is that class going to be?
Yes, it's going to be in the Midwest Learning Center here in our office, and it's going to be on Tuesday, November 12th or Thursday, November 14th at 6:30 p.m.
So I can tell you they do a great job. He partners with Colin Kastrick, an estate planning attorney that actually practices in that area, and they kind of tag team this class, giving you all the basic information you need with a lot of great vital things. We will not have updates, I don't think, obviously, until Congress is formed, but with the new makeup, what we're looking at in the legislative bodies on the federal level, we may get some relief on some of the things that were going to pinch people, but let's face it, they're not going to probably go away, but it's also going to be very advantageous for people in planning to use certain strategies in this next year that can really set up generational wealth. They can pass assets probably more freely now. We're going to have, some of my favorite strategies, by using life insurance trust properly are going to become extremely popular. So I think this bodes well for anyone that is, out there, the entrepreneur that's built a business that is trying to transition it to the next generation, or a family farm that's 3 or 4 generations, where we had a lot of folks that were in high risk of losing those assets. We're going to probably have a better environment for them to actually pass those on.
I think everybody has a real opportunity to be proactive right now, but not to be a downer, but reality still exists.
And that's just the pendulum swings, right? The pendulum's going to swing into the right, swing to the right, pretty big this election. But that means there's going to be a limited window of opportunity to do some planning to take advantage of some of the things that will go away, 4 years from now or whenever.
We just can't escape the fact that we're 35 going to $36 trillion in debt, and no country in human history has survived being over 150% debt to GDP, and we are on rails towards that. So I'm not trying to be a downer. Instead, take this as a great opportunity to batten down the hatches and get things ready.
Get things ready.
What a glorious opportunity.
Oh, that's what I literally was talking with one of our higher net worth clients early this morning, and talking literally about that. I said, you've got a second shot at the window now to do some massive changes in your planning that will really have huge benefits. So speaking of planning, though, why they got to be flexible and why you need to know that you're working with competent people, we talked about Prince's estate, which was, he died basically with no estate plan in place, really. prematurely, unfortunately, and obviously much before he thought he was going to pass. And his family fought for. We thought it was settled, and now nope,
It's reopened.
They're reopened, coming
Yep.
back out, and so you've really got to dot your I's and cross your T's, because if there are assets, people are going to challenge and go after them.
Yes.
But you sent me an article that was talking about Prince's estate, but it's also talking about your estate plan can have cracks in it while you're alive. So,
Absolutely.
So an actress who became really famous back in the late 80s and early 90s, Sharon Stone, you sent me an article. Tell me about what happened with her estate.
So she had a major medical event and was totally out of commission, totally incapable of
So
managing her assets.
incapacitated, and
Yep.
basically had a healthcare directive set up, et cetera.
Or
didn't?
not really.
Okay.
That's where the problem was. Her estate was worth $18 million. She claims it's all gone now. She went through this major medical event. While she was getting better, she had no power of attorney. She had not legally appointed a person that could step into her shoes and manage her affairs just like it was, their own money, with legal recourse if they fouled things up. Instead, as I guess happens sometimes when you have that kind of wealth and you don't have a plan, there were a lot of hands in the pot that were just frankly
people think
stealing
they
her
can,
money.
Yeah, and exactly.
It's gone.
They try to justify it. Well, I needed a new car to come visit you and to go take care of your pets or whatever, and they're draining the assets from the estate. And if you don't have somebody, and that's why we always talk about too, is when estates are this size, you should use corporate trustees.
Yes.
You don't use your family friend
No.
or your oldest child.
No.
That's one thing. If it's a $2 million estate, if you have a 20 or 30 or $200 million estate, you and I were recently talking with somebody who's got well over $100 million estate.
Absolutely.
That has major problems and no planning has been done. And the idea was wanting to pass it down, and that person is really in jeopardy if they don't take advantage of these windows. So having these documents in place, knowing who is the trustee on the trust, who is the caretaker of your finances and your health care, who gets to make those decisions. How often should someone like Sharon Stone, how often should she have updated those things so she knew what was going to happen?
Well, somebody at that net worth level, as long as they are using a professional organization, certainly you want to interview those people, make sure you're checking in and make sure that they will uphold what they promised they would do. But I would relax more if I hired a reputable professional firm to handle this for me. However, that's not what a lot of Americans should or could do. If you're going to appoint somebody that's a family member, I would absolutely review the documents, the relationship, the expectations, and the abilities at least every 3 years.
Well, and make sure they're willing to actually do the job, right?
That's a responsibility.
Yeah, it is. And so sometimes people just, name their oldest child, for instance, often as the trustee of the estate and the one that had the executor of the will, et cetera. And that child doesn't always want to do that. Or they may have a different financial situation than their siblings, and therefore they're steering the ship and not holding to their fiduciary responsibility, because they are bound by a fiduciary responsibility when they step in that role.
Well,
so you should interview your kids. Which one do you think should do it?
Yes.
Which one would want to do it? Which one has the capability to do it?
And
right?
I like that you said that singularly instead of, well, if I've got multiple kids and they're all a little bit different, let's appoint all of them, give them that power.
No, that can be bad.
No, pick one, but have open conversations. And we talk about this in the class. We call them courageous conversations because they're not easy or fun to have, but be transparent with everybody in the room together. And then when it's agreed that, hey, this is the person that I've selected, then maybe have the one-on-one conversation about more of the nitty-gritty.
No, I have this right now with my mom. There's 4 of us, so I have 2 brothers and a sister, and one of us is the primary on the finances, one of us is the primary on the healthcare, and the other 2 are backups for each.
There it is.
So I handle financial stuff, obviously. My sister's kind of the lead on the healthcare. She lives closest to her, et cetera. But you have to know the responsibilities. Anyway, this went fast. We're out of time. Again, tell everybody when this class is, because it's so important they get there.
Yes, it's Tuesday, November 12th or Thursday, November 14th at 6:30 p.m. here in our offices.
All right, so we'll look forward to seeing you, or go to the events page on the website. And thanks for stopping in the studio,
Thanks,
Mike.
David.
All right, Chip, what do we have next?
Up next, you have questions. David Brooks has answers. Q&A is next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Into the Q&A we go. David, the first question is about Berkshire-Hathaway. A news item said Berkshire-Hathaway is stockpiling cash. What's going on?
To say that they're stockpiling cash would be an understatement. They have been selling out of several of their largest holdings. And basically, you have to understand Berkshire-Hathaway now, the bulk of their holdings are 5 companies. And so they've been divesting. And the most popular one, which is no longer the largest company in the world as of today, Apple. They divested heavily out of Apple this last quarter. In fact, their cash hoard, I don't know if we have that graph. I actually put that graph out there to the team. Yeah, so their cash hoard has spiked to about over $325 billion. They now own more T-bills than the federal government. Yeah, process that for a moment. And the
hard
interest,
to wrap the brain around that.
Okay, so if those T-bills
what does it mean? What's going on?
Well, it means we're paying them about $1.3 billion every month in interest as they hold on to that. Yeah, we, the taxpayer, which I mean, good for them.
Yeah.
But what it's telling you is the investment committee over there believes that things are overvalued, and so when they bring up cash like this, typically they think they're going to find some opportunity to spend it, right? And so
you mean in the near future when there's a round of discounts, and then we're going to.
It's very simple. It's risk reward. They are no holds barred. They look at an analysis. If we can get a risk-free return of 4-5%, whatever they're getting on the cash or the cash-like instruments right now, and they believe stocks are overvalued. And Buffett's favorite indicator, it's often called the Buffett indicator, is basically you take what's called the Wilshire 5000, that's the 5,000 stock market index, the value of that, and GDP. And if the Wilshire is less than the amount that we produce in GDP a year, then stocks are cheap and you should buy them. If it's over, then stocks are overvalued. Well, it's over 210% as we sit here today. That's how big overvalue basically the stock market is. It's worth twice our stock market right now. The 5,000 biggest companies traded in the U.S., publicly traded companies, are worth more than 2.4% of our GDP we currently produce. Okay. That's extreme valuation. So they believe, and it doesn't mean, listen, they are not traders. Berkshire-Hathaway doesn't go in there, we're going to get a sell-off after the election. There were some people on Twitter saying, they think there's going to be a surprise Harris win. We do know at least Warren supported the left side of candidates, for the last several elections. But people thought, he's just getting that ready to go by when things go the wrong way in the election. No, they are seeing a opportunity in the next probably 18 to 24 months that things will reassess, values will come down, and they will go shopping, as they did in 2008, 2009, 2010. They made some pretty harsh deals, and they're not exactly friendly when they go in to make these deals because they know they kind of have the companies bend over barrel, so to speak. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so Goldman Sachs had to pay through the nose to get bailed out during the Great Recession. Yeah. So they are basically getting ample cash to go see what they can do, and we'll see what that looks like.
You mentioned, if I understood you, they raised a lot of this cash by selling Apple stock. Is that right?
They sold a lot of Bank of America. But they've been selling.
Is that a commentary on Apple or any of these, or that just happened to be the most handy, readily available way to raise the cash?
Well, I think it is a commentary on Apple. Frankly, look, Apple's a great company. I'm not a big Apple user. I think I have 2 iPads, but I don't use the iPhone, which is obviously the most popular phone. But it's telling you that Apple has kind of maybe reached its peak growth phase, if you will, right? So they, again, should we own Apple or should we own a risk-free asset and get 4 or 5%? So they're telling you what they think the future return would be on that stock, because Apple's worth 3.6 trillion, somewhere in there. I don't know the exact number today, but it was the richest company, by the way. That switched to a company called Nvidia this week. Is now for the second time in Nvidia's career. A couple months ago, it is now the highest valued company in history.
Well, funny you should mention Nvidia, because that's our next question. It's about Nvidia. I see that Nvidia has been added to the S&P 500 index, but I also see that Nvidia is facing a lawsuit. Should I invest in Nvidia, or is it shakier than it appears? Well, I know you don't give direct investment advice over the airways, but what's your take on the situation with Nvidia, David?
Okay, so first of all, the questioner, I appreciate the question, but the Nvidia was added to the Dow this past week. The Dow 30. Intel got kicked out, and Nvidia took its place. So the Dow Industrial Average is 30 stocks meant to kind of give a representation of the American economy. So Intel got booted, which has been a bellwether for a long time. So and now Nvidia got put in its place. Now, what happened is you immediately saw the stock pop when it was at all-time high, an additional 2%. And the reason that happens is because any fund that is tracking the Dow index, right, and there's a lot of index funds that will track it, are forced to buy it the minute that happens. They have to track it. So they had to go buy it, so that was guaranteed buyers, which pushed it to an all-time high. Now, there are some lawsuits there, and there's actually some rumblings out there on X or Twitter that you can find that maybe there is some issues in their accounting. And again, that would be pretty problematic if it were to be true. And of course, I'm not making any statements on this. I'm just telling you that there is.
You're being very diplomatic. Is the allegation that somebody in there is cooking the books?
Well,
what?
So we know that their third biggest client, which is a company called Supermicro, actually is going to be delisted here in about a week if they can't produce the documents on their accounting. So they're being investigated for accounting fraud.
A week or two ago
they are the third biggest purchaser of NVIDIA's products. So if that's fraud, there's got to be something wrong in NVIDIA's books too, right? So again, we'll see what this comes out. Now, here, you want an interesting tidbit, Chip?
Yeah.
Because the questioner said, hey, I see NVIDIA got the S&P 500. It got put in the S&P 500 2 decades ago. Do you know who it replaced?
No.
Enron. NVIDIA literally replaced Enron in these S&P 500. So a little irony there.
There's a painful little asterisk for many Omahans, but yes.
Yeah. So I cannot give you direct advice should you invest or not, and that if you're not our client, just to understand the way it works. But I would be very cautious to understand the risks I'd be taking buying this stock that has basically gone parabolic as anything. But again, they make the best chips. I own several computers that have NVIDIA processor, GPUs running in them, etc. Their products are amazing, but there's a lot to uncover there, and we'll probably cover that more just because we're starting to see a lot of news following some of that accounting. I think we covered that. Somebody had noted that NVIDIA had like 35 or 40% of their orders running through Singapore, a couple of small agencies. We discussed that on the air a few weeks back. So I'm very hyper alert to NVIDIA could have some issues, but boy, let me tell you, that would be, if that were to come true, that NVIDIA actually had some accounting mishaps in there, and that were to become public, you could see 60-70% rip off the company's valuation rather quickly. But what that would do to all these other indexes and ETFs that track technology, because it's the biggest holding, and again, it's the largest.
So
as we sit here
quite
today,
a ripple effect as well.
Absolutely, it's the largest company in the world by valuation as we sit here today.
David, we've got a question here about somebody with a question about an IRA. I have to start taking my required minimum distributions next year. I have 3 different IRAs. Should I take some money from each account or take it all from one?
Okay, so the rules on RMDs can be quite confusing. And again, we're certainly guilty of using lingo here or and so jargon. RMD stands for, again, required minimum distribution. When you attain RMD age, and there's 4 different ages, by the way, that's so confusing based on what year you're born. But for most people that have not hit the age, it's going to be 73 or 75. If you're born 1960 or later, it's 75. If you're born in the 50s, it's 73. If you're born in the 40s, we have other dates, but you're already taking them, so you know. But basically, your first distribution is a little under 4%. We use your life expectancy, okay? And basically, they believe you're going to live about another 24 years. And so they use a divisor. The IRS puts out this mortality table. We take your account value, and each year, as your life expectancy goes down because you get older, the divisor goes up, meaning you have to take a bigger percentage out. So you want to make sure you take it because the penalties are severe. They used to be 50%, now they're 25% of the amount you have to take out, and you still have to pay tax on it, by the way. And then you would still owe that next year that you missed the previous year's distributions. Now you have to take 2 out, and you can end up losing a ton of it.
What you don't know, and you can get blitzed and blindsided by it.
All right, so a couple other rules here on RMDs. If you have a 401k, a 403b, a workplace retirement account that you're still actively employed and contributing to, you do not have to take an RMD from that account. But the minute you retire, that 401k requires to take a distribution just like an IRA. Now, the questioner here mentions 3 different IRAs, so we are assuming they are all IRAs. But if one were a 401k and you're working, you would not have to take it there. Here's the other thing. If they're all IRAs, you can take the distribution from one account to cover all 3. But if one of those accounts, Chip, was a 401k, you cannot take the distribution out of the IRA to cover the 401k's required minimum distribution, because that is a different type of account. You would have to take it from the 401k. Again, as you mentioned, you don't know what you don't know, and they're very complex and confusing rules. And the problem is we find out as people get older, sometimes they forget, and this is very common of DIYers, and they don't take the distribution, and then 3 years later they get a letter in the mail, and now they have to take a couple years distributions, penalties on top of it, taxation, and not only that, those extra distributions then push them into pay a penalty for Medicare. Part B and Part D, and now they have 4 more taxes to pay for them and their spouse. So it's complex, and you should not tread lightly.
I said blitzed and blindsided. Don't be that person. We're here for you. Hey, up next, you're familiar with a million, a billion, and a trillion, but how many zeros are in a decillion? Google knows. We'll tell you why next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Well, David, you sent this to me, and at first I thought, oh, this is The Onion or this is the Babylon Bee or something, but no, it's Fox Business. All right. The headline is Russian court fines Google 2 decillion. Now, I had to look this one up. A decillion is the 2 has 33 zeros after it. Russian court fines Google $2 decillion for blocking YouTube content. And, David, if the fine isn't paid within 90 days, it doubles. So I don't know what that number is called, but it's 66 zeros. But what are we talking about? What's going on here, David?
Well, first of all, that's more than money than is on the globe.
Okay. Yeah.
They're obviously trying to send a message here, and of course, I don't think Google is going to be paying any of this. But it's pretty interesting, and it's almost like now a lot of people don't know Google is actually the highest known number. Google is a number. That's where Google comes from. So, and Google times Google is Googleplex. So there's some math for you. Okay. So that's literally the highest known number ever. But anyway, it's almost comical. But again, this is what you get when you get a country like Russia, who's basically a dictatorship, if you will. They have these elections every few years that Putin magically wins. But they're kind of letting you know their displeasure, and they want to control media, right? I mean, you go back to the days when we grew up, the Cold War days, right? When the state media was all people could get. Well, that's the problem is the internet and free speech, and which is a huge deal this election cycle here in the U.S., we're seeing the mainstream media here lose up, and they don't want to lose control, and they don't like Google letting people get access to information. So this is really more about the state of where media is and people in the globe getting access to information, and Russia is not for that. Never have been, and it'll be a long time before they are, unless there's some kind of change there. But again, we won't have time today to go into it. But obviously, I think there's going to be drastic shifts in the Ukraine-Russian war based on our election outcome. So I think people are going to get coming to the peace table talks there rather quickly. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things. Man, there's so much stuff we could talk about on this election. But anyway.
David, earlier in the show, you made reference to the 10-year Treasury bond. And actually, in recent weeks, you've been talking that up about, look, whatever the spin masters and talking heads in the news say, look to the 10-year Treasury bond to tell you what's really happening. And you sent the team a chart around, and our viewers on YouTube can see a comparison of charts there. What are we looking at? And for the benefit of radio listeners too, explain what this is all about.
So, well, the 10-year Treasury kind of drives everything. That's going to tell us where inflation is, right? Where the economy is, et cetera, because it's used in any kind of long duration. This is basically how you're going to base your mortgage payments, car loans, et cetera, are all backed off this. And these are monthly charts you're seeing here, right? And you're seeing the yield fly up, and it's telling you there's inflation is coming back in a very, very big way. And again, this chart was sent out prior to the election this week, but we just had the 10-year Treasury spike about 10, 15 basis points overnight with the election outcome, which is telling you inflation is going to be a problem. And again, with the time this airs, the Fed will have announced their rate cut, but I can tell you with a probably 95% certainty, they're going to cut 25 basis points later this week. We're recording this on Wednesday. That will happen on Thursday. But the 10-year is going to continue to push higher, in my opinion. That is a problem because it creates insolvency in the financial services area. We were talking about Berkshire lightening the load, and they lightened the load in several of their bank holdings, Bank of America being the most prominent one that people would know. And again, those financials all popped this morning on, less regulation, it's going to be a safer environment to operate, but they still have all those losses we've talked in recent weeks on their balance sheets. And the higher these interest rates go, if you go to the window and say, I want my money, and you create a run on these banks, right? Because you can go buy, and again, if these rates go up, you can go buy a treasury risk-free and get 4.5% from the federal government with zero risk. Do you want to still have it in a stock paying you 2% dividend at all-time high valuations? That's the decisions that people have to make. And again, it's different how you manage money institutionally versus for the average client or customer. Institutions have to just make factual decisions based on those risk parameters, where as a client or an individual, depending on their age, risk tolerance, whether they need to have the access, they can afford to take risk in shorter terms. It's very different the way money is managed via institution versus an individual's account. So what we're saying here is this is telling you inflation is going to show back up, and it's going to probably go over 4% in the next 3 to 4 months. So is that the Fed getting the Fed down to 2%, their target? Probably not,
doesn't
right?
sound like it.
Well, then how are they cutting rates again? So now are they flipping and they're going to focus on the job market, which we've been talking about is the problem all along, but they never wanted to say that. So now what I'm interested in is the statement that we get from the Fed this week to see how they try to massage that needle. But anyway, what it's telling you is things are still going to cost more for a little while.
David, you sent me something from the American Enterprise Institute, and it was dated 2017. I thought, oh, he must have been mistaken on that. But you were not mistaken. I think part of the reason this recent election turned out the way it did is that people did remember, boy, during the Trump presidency, basically a free market capitalist approach to fiscal policy. And not everything was perfect. The spending was still pretty high, but
Rising tide lifts all boats.
You had job numbers and economic growth numbers that we hadn't seen in 50 years.
And we had
America.
wage inflation for every quintile, right? So the bottom 20%, the next 20, every quintile had wage inflation at numbers we'd not seen in 30 years, right? So the lowest income people actually proportionally were getting faster raises than the top. So when we want to help everyone, that was actually happening when under the Trump presidency the first time around.
Well, and so the reason we bring that to bear now in this conversation, and the reason you were sharing this story with people is that, so the headline is, the world as 100 people over the last 200 years, a period of the largest gains in global living standards ever. And the story attributes it basically to the spread of capitalism. So what that means is, let's say the world has 100 people in it. For example, one example was education. 200 years ago, maybe 5 or 10 of the 100 people had access to what we would call high school education, some secondary level or higher. And now it's flipped. It's more like 90 out of the 100 have access.
Yeah, the standard
Same
of
thing
living.
For how many are living in poverty? 90% or 90 of the 100 200 years ago. Now it's flipped. Only 10 of the 100 are in poverty now, and on it went. Riff on that for a moment for us.
Well, yeah, so capitalism works. Now, are there problems with it? Do we get greedy people? Yeah. My son, who works for us, does research. He's working on a story right now on Chevron oil that's really interesting, and it's not good, right? But it's because these companies can get too big, and this is where people kind of hate on capitalism. These companies that become monopolies, if you will, just massive companies, they can, kind of do some shady things. Let's just face it, all for the almighty dollar. But capitalism, especially in America, is what raises the standard of living. Small business in particular is where 2 of every 3 jobs in America come from. So we want a capitalistic society where you're incentivized to start a business. Somebody actually made a comment on our YouTube feed that didn't like my why I'm voting for Trump little video. We had a short out there to the fact of Kamala's trying to stimulate small business. I was like, yeah, she's just trying to give away money for votes. She wasn't really stimulating business. What we want is incentive. We don't want the government to give you money. That's inflationary. We want the government to incentivize if you go out and start a business. There are benefits if you grow that business, if you hire people. Those are in the form of tax credits and deductions, et cetera. Those are incentives to help you create economic activity that benefits the whole.
Well,
right?
Small business roared under the Trump presidency, but
Absolutely.
it wasn't because of handouts. You got in some tangles with some people on social media. I remember a professor at UNL and somebody else. Talk a little bit about that.
And we went through it because the tax cuts that happened, to me personally, it was a decent sized number. It wasn't quite $100,000, but I benefited when the tax cuts went in. I took that money and invested and hired people like you.
You hired me in June of 2020.
Yeah.
It was the middle of the pandemic. But the
because
Trump
the tax
economy
credits
was
were
working
there.
so
I
well
took
for
and
you.
reinvested that capital. I could have just made money and had paid less taxes basically on the rules that were laid out before me. And again, I'm just following the rules. But I chose to take that capital, invest in, and I hired employees. And that got me higher revenue the following year, which then I hired more employees. And we just went over 40 employees this past month. In fact, we hired 3 people Monday and we're hiring more. I'm so excited for the future. We're going to hire about another 12 people probably in the next 90 days. So if you're anybody out there that has ever been in sales successful, ever want to transition into a role as financial advisor, contact us. We are actually and aggressively hiring right now because I see an opportunity, Chip, and I know people need our help. And there are going to be so many changes coming with the tax code because of this election. You're going to need somebody who knows what they're talking about to guide entrepreneurs and business owners. And so we're scaling out Tax Smart and Retire Smart both, and lots of exciting announcements coming. But listen, capitalism works. Is there a few things that go wrong? Absolutely. You've ever watched the movie Dark Waters? It's a great movie on the history of Dow Chemical.
Dark Waters. I don't know.
Oh,
that
you'd
one.
love it. It's actually an attorney who dedicates his life to go after Dow Chemical from the the coatings and pans. Right? We were all cooking with things that were creating cancer. Great movie, by the way. But so I love the true story movies. I love the underdog stories there. But for the most part, capitalism is awesome, and it's what gives us the standard of living we have. And it, again, I keep talking about I love equal opportunity. But we don't have equal outcomes, right? So if somebody works harder, should they be rewarded or not? And I say yes.
Of course.
So
It's the
yes,
American dream. You work
but-
hard, play by the rules, you get rewarded
and
for
it looks like that shift to the left, that more like handout socialistic environment is been stuffed down. It's been pushed back for a change. And again, pendulum swings. We'll talk about it. It will come back again. I'm just telling you. But for the near future, we are into the world of, hey, we're going to reward those that hustle and want to take advantage of the opportunity. And the opportunity is there.
That'll do it for this week, folks. Please visit our events page at retiresmartomaha.com to see everything we currently offer. And you heard from Mike Schudel earlier in this show, November 12th and November 14th, 6:30 p.m., either one of those nights here at the Midwest Learning Center at Retire Smart for estate and tax planning in retirement. We'd love to have you join us, but you do need to register online or by phone. David, bring us home.
Hey, have a blessed and prosperous week. If your votes didn't get the way you want, just realize there's another election in 2 years. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. For David Brooks and the entire team at Retire Smart, have a great week. Financial advisor Mike Schudel has a Juris Doctorate law degree but is not licensed to practice law. Any statements and opinions are general information and not legal advice.